Talent in Telecoms. Our next session that we've got coming up is an I&D masterclass. So Rachel Collins, the Head of Inclusion and Diversity of Colt Technology Services, will start off with a presentation about the Action in Inclusion internal campaign. And after that, she'll sit alongside Vicky for a one-on-one interview together. So give a warm round of applause to Rachel Collins.
Hello, does it sound good? Yeah. So if you're here, thank you. I know that I'm competing with drinks, so I'm really grateful that you're waiting a little bit longer before you go and have one. So, inclusion and diversity. So we've done a vast amount of inclusion and diversity work at my organization, but today I want to zoom in on a really specific intervention that I've been working on to bring inclusion to life and get our people to really think differently about building inclusion into their day-to-day habits. I'm Rachel Collins. I'm passionate about inclusion and diversity, building inclusive cultures, equitable workplaces. My other passion is using storytelling and impactful communications, because I started out in communications, and that's my background, and I worked in that in many years. So this kind of marries the two.
It's me, Brian Baumgartner,
a little bit.
And
so,
listen, some days,
why is
more
this
than others,
really
you need
important?
Like, for example, when you drop
why is it important to get people to think differently about inclusion and diversity? So diversity without inclusion doesn't work. It just doesn't stick.
It's the free-to-play
you can't attract diversity, diverse talent if you don't have an inclusive culture. You can't harness the diversity of thought and the creativity that comes with people coming to work and feeling that they can be themselves, that they can participate. So some companies think that if you really focus on the diversity piece and you get the mix right, then you've ticked that box, you're okay, you're doing well. But really, you have to focus on inclusion. It's about building inclusive cultures. And we know that inclusion is a human need. We need it, and we need inclusion to harness diversity. So at Colt, we actually launched our inclusion and diversity strategy 3 years ago. And you'll notice that we put inclusion first because we believe that's how important that it is. So, building an inclusive culture is key. And can I just say, it's great to have a relatively mixed org. We've got a lot of women, but we have got some men here. Inclusion is not just about women, it's about everybody. And it's everyone's responsibility. So before I start talking about the intervention that we ran, the campaign, engagement campaign, I want to talk about what we did first. Now, I've had my thunder stolen a little bit on this because Vicky's already talked about the TM Forum Inclusion Diversity Score. But first of all, what did we do? You need to know your starting point. So we needed to get a handle on what's the perceptions of inclusion within Colt. So we did lots of formal and informal listening. So focus groups, including virtual focus groups, which with moderators, that was a lot of fun. Listening sessions, lots of engagement with our fantastic employee networks. And as I've said, as has already been mentioned, we've worked with the TM Forum on developing the industry-first inclusion diversity score, the IDS. So in the way that NPS is seen as the customer measure, then we want the IDS to be seen as the inclusion measure, enabling industry companies to benchmark against others in their industry. So, what did we find out at Colt? Numerous things, and I'm not going to go into all the things we learned, because what we did in developing the IDS was that over the past year, we've run 3 inclusion pulse surveys, And each time that's helped us to work as a team, collaborative industry initiative to develop it. But it also gave us such great insights from our own organization each time we did it. And we've been able to action plan off the back of these insights. But one of the insights that came out, which I'm going to talk about today, is that we realized there were really high levels of enthusiasm about our inclusion and diversity agenda, but lower confidence in terms of, and lower confidence and in some instances competence in how to really drive this and make a difference across the organization, but including with people managers, a group that absolutely you need to have on board to build an inclusive culture. So we had people asking, you know, what's this got to do with me? How can I make a change? In some instances, I think people saw, yeah, inclusion and diversity. It's great that Colt does this. HR and our employee networks over here do it. It happens over here. It's great that it happens, but it's nothing to do with me. And we really wanted to change that perception and that understanding of inclusion and diversity. So we launched a campaign in May. Phase 1 of the campaign it's all around wanting to show that inclusion is something that you have to be active about, you have to be conscious and intentional. Everyone can learn to be more inclusive. It can be seen as a skill that you can develop in the way that you can develop communication skills, problem solving, commercial awareness, you know, all of these things. You can develop it, you can get better. So this was a key message. So building inclusive habits in your day-to-day working life was this kind of key theme that ran throughout the whole of the campaign. And what did that campaign look like? So we created an actioning inclusion intranet area full of resources, FAQs, one-pagers, you know, just things that we thought, we have a really practical demographic group of people at Colt, and it was about making it noisy, as you can see from the visuals. We wanted it to be noisy and eye-catching and loud, but above all, we wanted it to be really, really practical. You know, Eric mentioned the example of giving people the tools to run really, really inclusive meetings. You know, that's the kind of thing that I'm talking about. So we had lots of, you know, guides and toolkits and checklists to be able to do these types of things. We also, what else have we done? We created videos, and this is the storytelling aspect that I spoke about earlier. Stories are key when we're talking about inclusion, because it's all well and good quoting all of the industry statistics about, we know that people leave organizations that aren't inclusive. We know that people join organizations that are inclusive, but you have to bring that to life, and storytelling is a way of doing it. So getting people to share their stories via video. So we had people share inclusion tips via video. We did social media, internal social campaign on Facebook Workplace, sharing an inclusion tip of the week. We had our people, VPs and senior managers sharing blogs around their thoughts around this, and then cascading that throughout the organization. We launched an inclusion e-card. We even launched and designed and launched our own inclusion bingo, which, you know, just getting people to think differently. So what was the inspiration behind this? This is a book that I'm always telling people they should read. I'm not on commission, but it is a really, really good book. Atomic Habits by James Clear. So this is all about building habits and getting better over time. So the effects of small habits compound over time. So if you get 1% better each day for 1 year, then you'll end up 37 times better than when you started. And it's a really useful way to think about inclusion because basically an inclusive culture is inclusive behaviors. And what are inclusive behaviors? They're inclusive habits that people have built in to the way that they work and the way that they do things. So he has a great example. Well, one of the examples he gives is, and how to build how to build habits is habit stacking. So habit stacking is where the example that probably will resonate is people standing on one leg to brush their teeth because they're trying to get fit and test their balance. So that's habit stacking. You're putting one habit on top of another. What this means from an inclusion perspective in the workplace is building an inclusive habit on top of another habit. So an example might be you're writing a meeting agenda and then using the tool, the checklist that we've already put together on how to run an inclusive meeting, run through it. Another inclusive habit that you could build and stack on top of another one is just making time. So having your morning coffee and then making time to reach out, because we know that one of the key parts of inclusion is listening and really understanding our people. So reaching out to people and really understanding. And another example might be, how you recruit. So when you're planning your interview, that kind of thing, how you might spend some time to have a look at the types of biases that come up. And that leads me on to how can we engage managers to engage teams. So I said a little bit earlier on, people managers are so important in this. There is an inclusion and diversity saying that the middle managers are where inclusion and diversity initiatives go to die, because if you can't get the engagement of people managers who make a lot of decisions around what happens in that organization and a lot of people decisions, then you're not going to build an inclusive culture. So there was two things where we wanted to engage people managers. One of them was for them to understand opportunities for inclusion throughout the employee life cycle. So we did a couple of sessions specifically around the opportunities to build inclusive habits and build inclusion into the people life cycle. And the other thing is we launched a Teams workout manual with activities, tools, ideas to help managers drive conversations about inclusion with their teams, build trust, psychological safety. So things where they could just take 10 minutes out of a team meeting, or something they might actually do as a team building exercise. So all of these we wanted to use to make really, really practical for our people. And as we go into phase 2 of the campaign, which we're just moving into, it's going to be taking that step further and really talking about allyship and advocacy, and really explaining the what, the how, the why of allyship, which is essentially the next step. So I could talk about this all day. You can probably tell, but I've gone slightly over time. Just in summary, inclusion got to come first. Can't drive diversity and harness diversity without it. But you've got to bring it to life for people. It's important to know your start position. And finally, everyone can build inclusive habits. So I think it's a good message to take to your audience, to your organizations, but also, we're all responsible for inclusion, and actually we can all think about the inclusive habits that we can build. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Rachel. Do you want to come and sit here? Thank you so much. And that was great from Rachel. And I've worked with Rachel quite a lot, particularly on the collaboration work, and also with Kerry Gilder, the Colt CEO, who's our D&I chair. So basically what you're saying, Rachel, is for you and for Colt, this is not a tick-in-a-box exercise.
Exactly. You can't really create change by it being a tick box exercise. And I think sometimes that's what organizations do when they're just focusing on diversity. If you really want to create an inclusive culture to harness all the good things that having a diverse workforce gives you, then you can't be tick box about it. Yeah. There's no silver bullet. There's lots of different levers that you can pull, but the culture piece has to be up there, and really helping people to understand their role in it has to be really high up on the agenda.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. And also on the agenda at the senior level as well. And I know of late as well, you've been doing a lot of collaboration and a lot of learning around diversity and inclusion and best practices, and particularly through the work you've been doing with us. How has that really helped you? Has it accelerated? How has it helped?
Being involved in this collaboration to build the IDS has been fantastic, I think, for us to be involved in it from an organisational perspective. Just, from the perspective that we were able to be involved in all of the different trials, which meant that we learn a lot each time, but also working with the industry and learning together with people from the industry was just invaluable. And I think you said earlier about how no one company can do this alone. It makes sense to work together. I think this is a good example of that.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, real change kind of requires passionate leadership, and I really stand by that. We've all got the same problems, we've all got the same challenges, and I think, as I said earlier as well, we can fight over the talent later, but let's make sure, A, we get it into this industry, and B, that we keep it. So I think that's great. We've had a question come in on Slido. So how do you measure actual, and I think this is referring back to the program, or the programs that you've done, how do you measure actual adoption by people managers, and so that it's not just a tick-in-the-box exercise for them? I think a lot of it comes down to accountability, right?
Yeah, I don't think there's just one way of measuring either. So I think there's a few different ways of measuring. So on a very practical level, we can see how many people have come and interacted with the manager sessions that we've put on for them. But are they taking those learnings back into their teams and doing something about it? Well, we know that each time we've run the Inclusion Pulse survey internally, and we've been doing this work, that the gap between the gap has narrowed between those who consider themselves part of the majority in our organisation and those who consider themselves part of the minority. That gap has narrowed, and the actual inclusion score is really strong within Colt. So, but that's what we've been tracking is that gap narrowing. And the other thing is just, for example, we've been running an inclusive recruitment program at the same time as this, so building inclusion through our whole recruitment process. So at each touch point, making sure that we're inclusive, and from making sure that the way that you track that is, of course, the people that you're hiring is a way to track that. So there isn't just one way to track. There's a couple of different ways that we're tracking this.
No, and that's great. And then you talked about, you started this program in 2019. What are you doing now to evolve it?
So we launched our strategy in 2019, and the journey we've been on is probably not dissimilar to a lot of organisations. But early on, we put together the governance and really focused on getting that leadership buy-in, which obviously we have with Kerry. But across the whole leadership team, we built Inspiring Inclusion was part of our management fundamentals training. We baked inclusion into our company values. We launched our Inclusion and Diversity Council and made sure that we had some governance around all our different employee networks and initiatives, and made sure that we had measures, and we started to measure not just the perceptions of inclusion, but also started to ask people to voluntarily share demographic data so that we can measure diversity. And that's a whole other story. If anyone wants to talk about, I actually know quite a lot now about the different privacy laws in different countries, just being part of that program, we're running that program. But over the course of time, we've moved from being initiative-based to really finding ways to really embed this into ways of working. I've talked from more of a culture perspective today, but also embed within processes, policies, ways of working. So really embed that into the people life cycle, essentially. And, you know, going into next year, that work will continue.
That's great. And I want to bring this back to you a little bit now, actually, just to kind of say, you know, you're obviously very, and I know, actually, because I know you, that you're very passionate about this. Like, what and who inspires you to do this? Sorry, I've put you on the spot.
No, it's okay. I've always worked in really male-dominated industries, and I think that there's part of me that felt that, you know, having a more balanced workforce actually is a real positive, and I started to see it, and that inspired me. I've got a small daughter, you know, she inspires me, but just interacting with people who are also passionate about this. You know, Kerry inspires me. Kerry is just so full of passion and energy around this. So, yeah, working with you.
Thank you.
But I think for me, it's got to be beyond gender, and I think I touched on that at the beginning. But it's more than gender. It's absolutely diversity of thought. It's diversity of personality. It's all the different protected characteristics that are covered in all the you know, the various equality laws that we have. But it's more than that, you know.
Global,
what kind of, and global, yeah, and how do you learn? What's your personality type?
Okay, that's great. We've had another question come in. Interesting one is, it's just moved down. Sorry. Where's a great example blueprint of an inclusive and diversity strategy to help companies just starting out? Well, I can take some of that. First and foremost, there's the GLF. If you're part of the GLF. I don't know who that's come from, but if you're part of the TM Forum membership, which I think most organizations here are, then we have not just those blueprints on how to do, we also have the how do you measure your cultural maturity. We're just building that model that will be ready in December, which is accessible by all of our members. And that's bringing together lots of different companies, lots of thought leaders from lots of different organizations all over the world. So that's a really good source, and some of it is in the public domain.
There's lots of great tools out there. What I would say is, you know, quite a lot of the time what's important is to look at, you know, how do you attract and retain diverse talent, but also just building it into the whole organization. So, you know, how you work with your suppliers and your partners and customers, is it inclusive? In terms of looking at, you know, a blueprint inclusion and diversity strategy, I would say that each organization is different and one size doesn't fit all. So something that I've been cognizant over the past couple of years is people will often come to me from within our organization and go, this company's doing X, you know, we should also be doing X. And sometimes it is the case, but sometimes is our problem statement the same? Are our root causes the same? You know, are we losing talent because of the same reasons? Are we not recruiting people because of the same reasons? I think key thing is really understanding your starting point and really understanding what your problem statement is for your organization, doing a lot of listening.
Yeah, and I think we've got literally 1 minute left for this one. How do you break it's a good question, how do you break the recruitment pattern of people hiring like themselves, or answer the claim that diverse candidates aren't applying for roles? I've had that in terms of we're not getting them applying for the roles, and particularly if you're using an agency, just go back and say, go find them. They are there. I know that because they're all over my LinkedIn, they're all over, they are there. So you have to have that diverse pool. And it is a problem, people hiring like themselves, and that's where this has to be bought into at the top all the way down, so that there's checks in place to make sure that that is not happening. And a good way of doing that as well is to get somebody more junior in to kind of do part of that interview. And I'm not saying add another interview section, because that's one thing we talked about earlier, but that's one way of doing that, because it shouldn't be happening.
I think education is really important. So managers need to understand the types of biases that can come up in the recruitment process and how to mitigate for that particular bias. A great thing is, I think as you touched on there, is people shouldn't be interviewing people on a one-on-one, actually. That's how individual bias does creep in. You should be doing it as panels, and pairs or panels, and actually having a proper interview process based on, whether you choose to do competency-based interviews, that type of style of interview, that's probably a best practice style, but it should be based on evidence, not people's individual feelings. And if you make it very much evidence-based and you teach your hiring managers how to do it, then it does start to mitigate for this.
Right.
We've finished.
I'm being flashed at here. So with that, I'd like to thank you all for staying with us. I know as we said earlier, we're competing with drinks out there. Hopefully that was really useful. And of course, again, I'd like to thank the GLF for putting this on. But Rachel Collins from Colt, thank you so much. That was excellent. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll move this swiftly on then to the last panel session of the day, completing day one of Capacity Europe 2022. So again, we just want to say a big thanks to track sponsor Colt Technology Services for their support of this. And this brings us to the panelists for this one. So we've got Amber Villegas-Williamson, Senior Consultant of Uptime Institute. She'll be moderating the panel discussion. Ayman Al-Ali, the Chief Business Excellence Officer for Centre Free. Ian Ruddy, for SVP of Human Resources for EMEA at Digital Realty. Angela Capon, who's the VP of Global Marketing at Etchinex. And right at the back behind me, Umaima Haider, Lecturer of Computing Science and Digital Technologies there of the University of East London. May you give a warm round of applause as they take to the stage.